welcome everyone. I'm Louise Crow, I'm Chief Executive of mySociety. Thank you very much for joining us for this 1 hour session on tackling the climate crisis with access to information. So at mySociety, we create and run digital services that help break down barriers to democratic participation. We aim to equip people to take action and drive meaningful change. As part of that work, we run the digital access to information platform, What Do They Know?, which has now been used to make more than 1 million access to information requests. And we're also members of the ATI network, which is a network of organisations across Europe using similar digital ATI platforms to support and enable people to use their rights of access to information in effective ways. And this event is produced in collaboration with our ATI network partners, Access Info Europe and Frag, Staat. It's the first in a short series on the practical value and application of access to information in key public interest domains. Now, the reason we're running these events is that we believe that knowledge is power across all the complex issues that we're now faced with as societies. And a key goal for us as organisations running platforms that can enable and support access to information is to try and build networks and collaborations where we can bring that power to the key issues that are affecting all of our lives and support effective reporting, effective research projects and campaigns. Now, the causes and effects of the climate crisis are material and factual at every level in our society. And so we believe that access to information rights can be an invaluable tool in getting the evidence and putting it together. And more than belief, I'm very delighted that we are joined today by 3 expert speakers who can demonstrate that, talking about legal battles, investigative breakthroughs, how transparency laws and data access rights are being used to hold polluters to account and push for stronger environmental protections across Europe. So I hope you're going to get some practical inspiration from this session. We really welcome feedback as it's the first in this short series and are very interested in opportunities to build collaborations and support further work on this area. So if you do want to get in touch on either of those subjects, please mail aticop@mysociety.org to contact the ATI network. That's ati-cop@mysociety.org, and we would love to hear from you. And in terms of our running order today, we are going to kick off with Lucas Amin. Lucas is an investigative journalist who's used access to information law for more than a decade. He co-authored the Centre for Investigative Journalism's handbooks on freedom of information and environmental information requests. And he was part of a team whose FOI work won a British Journalism Award in 2022. In his reporting, he has thrown light on climate issues from aviation industry lobbying to the approval of new coal mines. And he's going to talk about using access to information to make front page news. He's going to be followed by Anne Friel, who is Head of Environmental Rights and Rule of Law at Climate Earth. She's specialised in environmental democracy and fundamental rights. She's a qualified solicitor and has been working to improve access to environmental information, again, over the last decade through legal advocacy and litigation. And she is going to be talking about the application of strategic litigation to climate action. And finally, Joschi is the climate officer at Frag, Staat, and a journalist, education officer and environmental engineer who has also been active in the environmental and climate justice movement for over 10 years. And Joschi is going to share some lessons from Frag, Staat's Climate Helpdesk. And having had the benefit of all that expert experience, it's then going to be over to you for questions. So please do enter your questions as you think of them in the Q&A at the side. And my colleague Julia Cushion from mySociety is going to be wrangling those questions and putting them to the speakers. So with all that squared away, I'm now going to pass over to our first speaker, Lucas. Welcome, Lucas. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Louise. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. And before I start, I would just say that I'm a massive fan of all the work that mySociety does. I feel like these days we get bad news about the internet on a daily basis, and it's great to remember that that technology can actually do lots of good things too. I also didn't realize that Access Information Europe was kind of a co-organizer, a co-host. And it would be fitting just to say a quick thank you to Helen Derbyshire, who passed away recently. who was one of the first people I ever met in the info rights world, and who gave me a lot of encouragement and support when I was kind of like getting to grips with these things for the first time around 15 years ago. So thanks to Helen, and it's great that Access Info are a part of this too. Okay, so as Louise says, I'm an investigative reporter. I run a newsletter with a friend of mine called Peter Gagan. It's called Democracy for Sale. And we do lots of work on things like political corruption, money in politics, and corporate lobbying. We don't exclusively cover the environment, but frequently the environment comes up as an issue because we're looking at things like the oil industry or the water industry or, as Louise mentioned, aviation. And I, I basically use info law on a daily basis to do my work. And in these short few minutes that we have, I want to convey to you how easy it is to make access requests and get results that walk themselves into the national news. There are, of course, a couple of tricks, and you do need some experience and some know-how, but there's really nothing stopping you from making a request today that could be in the newspapers within, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 months' time. And I really hope that at least one person in this audience is going to be that person. And if you think you are, you're so welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn and talk more. And I'm happy to share examples of work, examples of requests, whatever it is you think you need to move it forward. Now, I just want to, I know I was billed on this event as talking about how we can make front page news. Um, I'm just going to qualify that a little bit because it is quite difficult to make front page news with EIR requests. I have done it, I'm pleased to say. I managed to do it 3 times to be on the front page. But all of those were quite a while ago. They were all before Brexit, I realized when I was preparing for this. And frankly, that end of the spectrum is a bit more complicated. And so what we're going to focus on here today are really simple requests that still make good stories that are still in the national press. Hope that's okay with everybody. And just before we get going, I just want to go over the very basics of how an environmental information regulations request works. I know many of you will know this, but just so we're on the same page. Basically, you have the right to request information from a very broad range of public bodies. That could be as simple as saying, I know that the energy minister met with Shell in September, and I want to see all the records related to that meeting, including the briefing and the readout and the communications. Thanks very much, Lucas. In principle, in 20 working days, the authority should come back to you and respond, and hopefully, ideally, give you that information. In practice, things can get more complicated than that, and they often do, but they don't have to. And as I said today, we're going to focus on 3 examples where things didn't get very complicated. And the first story I want to talk about is around water companies in Britain. So in England, we have one of the world's only fully privatized water systems, and it's failing miserably. There's companies dumping raw sewage into the rivers. The investors that own the companies are making billions of pounds in profit, and the government and the regulators have basically failed to get a grip. And this is an area that we look at constantly. So as I was going through some spending records of the Environment Department, what I noticed was that the Environment Department had given one water company a £40 million subsidy. And I was very surprised because water companies are public enemy number one. And the company in question, called Southwest, had basically been in court several times that same year. Its legal defense in one of these cases was that no one has a right to swim in the ocean, and therefore it was okay to pollute. So as you can imagine, lots of questions arise. Why is the government subsidizing a water company? What is the subsidy for? How much has it earned? When did the things begin? And so I rattled off a relatively simple EIR's request. I think it had 5 questions. And a month later, we got the response. And the response showed that more than £450 million had been given to this water company, while at the same time it had regularly been prosecuted for dumping raw sewage into the rivers. In the same period of time as it received all that public money, investors had taken £1.5 billion in dividends out of the company. Uh, the subsidy, the ostensible reason for the subsidy was to help keep customers' bills down. But that didn't stand up to scrutiny in light of the fact that £1.5 billion was going out to shareholders in that same period of time. And as a result, it was a credible argument that the government was essentially just handing money straight to investors. So that was the story we wrote, more or less. We published it on our newsletter, which you should all subscribe to, and which I'll ask Julia to send a link to later. I think you'll like it. We also partnered with a newspaper in Britain called the Daily Mirror. They ran their version, and that ensures it kind of reaches a wider audience that are not on our slightly geeky info rights newsletter. And I'm happy to say that the subsidy is no longer paid. And I would not want to overclaim that it was our story that kind of made the difference, although it wouldn't have hurt. But we did also recently have a change of government, and Labour are taking a kind of tougher line on some of this stuff. So that is one of the stories that we did quite recently. And I wanted to change tack for the second one and talk about another thing that we investigate a lot, which is lobbying, corporate lobbying. In 2018, there was an outcry about plastic pollution in Britain. And as a result, the government at the time promised to radically change the way that they tackle the problem. Right? We've long had this thing called the polluter pays. That means a lot of things to a lot of people. But they came up with a new, much better idea, in my opinion, called the producer pays. So basically, if you're Coca-Cola and you make a plastic bottle, you're basically going to have to pay a tax at the point of production for every piece of plastic that you make. And therefore, you're hitting companies in their pockets before or as they produce the waste, rather than down the line, you're trying to recycle and whatnot. It's a very, very good idea, in my opinion. The problem is it never happened. And I was thinking about this last year. I thought, wasn't there a manifesto promise by the Conservative Party to introduce this thing? And there was, and it didn't happen. And so we thought, well, why didn't it happen? And we looked at some, again, we start with public records. Okay, we can see that the Environment Secretary is meeting with food and drink lobbyists. Well, what are they talking about? Well, let's send an EIR request and let's ask for records of the meetings. And we more or less we got the disclosures without having to do any further appeals. There was a little bit of delay in the process, and that is a frustratingly common thing that you'll encounter. But what did the records show us? They showed us that the 3 biggest food and drink lobbyists in the country had been invited into a secret and closed group with environment civil servants to get the policy ready for industry, basically. Now, there's some credibility to why you would do this. Like, it's complicated, you want it to work, you need industry's buy-in and stuff. But there are also clear risks, right, about basically letting in these companies into the policymaking process too early. Because it became clear that this policy was going to cost the polluters around £1.5 billion a year. And that's the whole point of it, right? You're putting a disincentive on producing waste so that we make less of it. And the money that we raise in the meantime, we can spend on good stuff. As it became clear how kind of punitive the policy was going to be, the lobbyists started inventing reasons to delay the introduction of it. And to this day, it has not been introduced. And with every year that passes, it's 1.5 billion that the industry saves. And with every year that passes, it's millions more tons of waste that the public sector and infrastructure has to deal with. So that story we also wrote for our newsletter, and we also published it with the Observer before it was sold to Tortoise Media, when it was still the Sunday sister paper of The Guardian. To this date, as I said, I don't think the policy has been introduced. It is slated to come in later this year, but I won't believe it until I see it. And I would also like to tell you about a third story, if I have the time. I think I do. And this one is a little bit different because, so as I've said already, you can make EIR's requests to public authorities. But in Britain, where we have a huge amount of privatization and outsourcing, there's been some very interesting case law around what is a public authority for the purposes of this law. And Supreme Court has found that actually private companies can be considered public authorities in certain circumstances. And the energy utilities have been considered public authorities sometimes for the purpose of this law. And so we wanted to put that into practice. And we noticed a company called Centrica, it's Europe's biggest gas wholesaler. Centrica sells something called green gas. And we thought, well, what is green gas? We looked in the small print, and actually 90% of its green gas is normal gas, but they buy some carbon offsets to apparently offset the impact of your normal gas. Okay, well, what offsets do you buy, Centrica? How does it actually work? They don't tell you. So we made a request, and we asked for the full portfolio, every carbon offset, every carbon credit they'd ever bought, and we got it. It took about a week. Centrica were very, very compliant, which is surprising because what the portfolio showed was absolutely outrageous. Most of their carbon credits had been bought from a completely discredited Chinese scheme that had been investigated for fraud by the UN and barred from carbon markets. The other carbon credits in their portfolios, the projects had been accused of land grabbing in the Amazon and bribery in an Indian dam. Like it was not good. So we partnered with Sky News. They did a TV segment, and we ran a print story. And I'm happy to say that when we did a follow-up request to Centrica for their carbon offset portfolio, the next one was completely different. And they had basically got rid of all their crappy carbon credits. I'm still not very convinced about carbon credits in general, to be honest with you. In fact, I'm completely unconvinced. But it was still nice that we kind of moved the dial somewhat on that piece. So those are my three, hopefully very simple examples of how EIR's requests can make national news. And as I say, if you would like to see copies of the story, copies of the request, copies of the disclosure, or you just want to kind of a bit of a hand or some advice on how to do this, I'm so happy to help. You can probably most easily find me on LinkedIn. My name is Lucas Amin, and yeah, I'll be here for questions at the end too. Thanks.
Amazing, Lucas. Thank you so much, and thank you for being so open about your practice, which I know isn't always the case across journalism. That's just great.
Well, there are things you can share and things that you can't. Yeah.
For sure. I'm going to pass over now to Anne to cover the strategic litigation and climate action.
Okay, I'm going to take this topic from a legal perspective, so that means that I have slides. I'm going to try and share my screen seamlessly, and hopefully that will work. Can you see my screen? Yes? Okay, yep. Great. Okay, so I'll start off. So just as a thank you again to mySociety as well for inviting me to speak about my work at Client Earth on transparency and access to mostly environmental information. So just by way of a quick introduction, so I'm an environmental lawyer. I work at Client Earth, which is an environmental charity. And our kind of particularity is that we really use law and legal tools to affect systemic change for the environment. So these are the kind of, it's not seamless. I can't move my slides along. There we go. So I just want to cover, first I want to cover just basically the context of why, as an environmental activist, working in an environmental organisation, I really focus a lot of my work on transparency and access to information. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the legal tools that I use for that, and especially the Aarhus Convention. And then I'll talk a bit about what we tend to request and why we request it, and how that informs our work and our aim goal, which is to obviously stop the triple planetary crisis, and why we use litigation to do that. And then I'll finish with a quick case study of the kind of work that we do. So first of all, I know I'm not going to take you through all of these treaties and these articles. The point of putting them there is just to show that that we have a place, civil society has a place. We have the right to request information, and that our governments collectively have made normative choices to say that we need to have a safe space to be able to do that, because information is the basis of everything that civil society does. We need to be informed so that we can participate in the public life of our governments and of who governs us. So what we do is valid, and that we should be doing more of it. So although I'm not going to take you through all of these treaties, I am going to talk a bit more about this one, because it is the love of my life, really, the Aarhus Convention. And if there's one thing that I would really like to impart to anyone who's never heard of it, it's just for you to take away that this exists, to have a look a bit more at it, because it's a really, really amazing legal tool. So what's really unique about it is that as opposed to most other environmental international agreements, which talk about the duties and obligations that states owe to each other and don't talk about individuals very much, the Aarhus Convention is actually all about the obligations that states and governments owe to us, the people. So that makes it not only an environmental treaty, but also a living human rights treaty. And it kind of merges these two worlds. What's really important is it's got a very good compliance mechanism, so individuals can actually make complaints to the Aarhus Convention Compliance Committee, and it also has a rapid response mechanism for environmental defenders who are being penalised or harassed for using their rights to access information. It's been ratified by the EU itself, so it applies to the EU institutions and to all of its member states, and also to the UK, which I forgot to put in there, and also most of the Council of Europe territory as well. So what's unique about this as well is that it really makes the link between the active and informed citizens and the need for active informed citizens to bring about positive environmental outcomes, and to really realise the right of every person to the right to a healthy environment. So yeah, the whole premise is that civil society needs to be informed and active in order to preserve the environment. And all of our governments have signed up to this and agree with it, apparently. So this is the way I visualise in Client Earth. We visualise the Aarhus Convention. It has these three pillars. Access to information is one of them. There's public participation in environmental decision making, and then the right to go to court as well. So obviously this is really important for all of our work. This rests on the premise of free civic space and an enabling our environment for civil society. And then obviously this all goes towards the right to a healthy environment. So there are very detailed access to information obligations in the Aarhus Convention, most of which, they kind of follow the logic of most freedom of information laws in, for example, in the EU or in UK. So you have individuals have the right to request information, which is a lot what Lucas was talking about. And this information can only be withheld if there are really good and strict exceptions to that. So transparency is the rule, and withholding information is the exception, and those exceptions have to be applied really strictly. The convention also contains the right to be able to go to court if your information is withheld, if you don't get the information you want, which is really important to be able to enforce your rights. And there's also quite detailed obligations to actively disseminate information. So for public authorities to publish environmental information, and that's really one of the real obligations that's not followed through on very well. It's quite hard. In general, public authorities are not publishing the information that they're required to. And this obviously, when the information is published, then it avoids all of the expense and the time, etc., of making requests. So the good news is that the Aarhus Convention has been quite well implemented into EU law. So that means that it's kind of harmonized throughout the EU territory. So you have the same access to information rights in each country, which isn't the case for general freedom of information laws, which can vary quite a lot. And the UK has also implemented them faithfully as well. The last piece of legislation there is how the Aarhus Convention applies to the EU institutions themselves. So it means that when you ask for information held, the gold mine of information that's held by the EU institutions on everything that's happening in the EU, then you have these rights as well. So I think the one thing that I'd really like you to take away is that the environmental information is defined really broadly in the convention, so it covers a lot of information, and you can sometimes have better rights to environmental information than you can to other types of information. So if you do think that what you want is environmental information, state it really clearly in the request so that the public authorities can apply the correct legal framework. This can make a really big difference. For example, in the Aarhus Convention, there are no restrictions as to who can request information. So no restrictions as to residence, or if you're an organization where you're registered, anyone can, and that's often not the case for general FOI legislation. And the other thing is that there's really great rules on requesting information on emissions. So usually, for example, if you request information on emissions, they can't be withheld on the basis that it's a commercial secret or that it will harm, the reputation of a company, etc. Because emissions are diffuse and they affect all of us. Those kind of proprietary rights don't apply. So that can be really helpful, especially for climate action. I'm just going to take you through a little bit of what we tend to request at Client Earth, what comes up in our kind of daily work, and also in the work that we do in coalition with other NGOs. And yeah, well, basically, I'm going to go through the why and the what. So why you request information really depends on what you're going to use it for. For us, as a kind of legal organization, we tend to work on the whole life cycle of the law. So we do a lot of advocacy work, and we're trying to participate in decision-making processes and shape them to be more sustainable. That's often why we request information. That's the cat trying to get in the door. That's us trying to get into decision-making processes that can often be quite closed for us. We also are all the time trying to ensure better implementation of environmental laws, and the information that's held by public authorities can be really helpful for that. For campaigning and public awareness raising as well. And then, of course, to ensure the legitimacy of decision making. So quite often we'll be looking at the conflicts of interests of people involved in decision making, like independent scientific experts. Are they really independent? What's their work history, etc., that could lead them to have certain biases? And for example, a really good example is quite a big recent case at the EU level where the New York Times requested access to the president of the Commission's text messages because she'd actually struck a deal on vaccines with Pfizer through WhatsApp. which is not really usually the kind of legitimate way of taking these decisions. And then we use it a lot in our enforcement action, of course. So we use it in our litigation, which is to enforce environmental and human rights. So what kind of information is this? So a lot of the time we're really looking for the scientific basis of decisions. What science was taken into account? Does it live up to the high standards that are required of public authorities to look at the most recent scientific evidence? We're also looking at other things like the economic justifications put forward for certain decisions and legislation, and also the legal basis of it as well, because this often what we find is that some quite political decisions can be passed off as being legal decisions, so that they're not actually about political choices, but there's legal necessity, and that's often not the case. So having access to legal advice from public authorities, legal services can be really, really helpful. And that's something that we've litigated on as well to ensure that we can actually get that, especially when it's about legal advice on a legislative process. Then at the EU level, because of the way that decisions are made through negotiation of lots of different countries and different institutions, we often want access to their negotiating position. So what is it that what policy choices are they putting forward and defending, so that we can kind of call them out and call them to account when these are very unsustainable. We often have the blame it on Brussels phenomenon at the EU level, where a member state will secretly defend one position, and when they see it's unpopular with their electorate, they say, it's Brussels. So we try to having those positions can be really helpful for that. And information on conflict of interest, as I said, so like the identity of independent scientific experts, sometimes that's withheld on personal data for personal data reasons, but there's a real public interest often in knowing the identity of who is feeding into decision making, because it's important to be able to check their track record. And then, information on compliance. So this is something that the European Commission holds. They have a lot of information on what member states are complying with what laws, and that could be really helpful for us, so that we can put pressure in the member state where perhaps they're not doing so well, so that we can bring enforcement action to kind of help to make sure that these laws are enforced. And this is information that we cannot get access to at the moment. It sounds like it's kind of, you wouldn't think it would be so politically sensitive, but that's really withheld very, very strongly at the EU level. And unfortunately, that position is defended by the court. So my role and the role of my team at Client Earth is to kind of observe and identify systemic barriers. So when we see that there's something coming up time and again that's really stopping us and our partners and other civil society actors from having information, we'll decide whether it's worth litigating that issue to really bring it, set a really powerful precedent in law, bring it to the attention of the hierarchy, and actually try to bring some behavioural change in the way that officials are dealing with access to information requests, and also the way that they publish information. So it's not a decision we take lightly, because it comes with a cost. We have to pay a lawyer, even though we're all lawyers, we have to pay an independent lawyer to represent us. If we lose, we have to pay the costs of the other party, etc. But where we think there's a good chance of success, or that's a very particularly important issue, that's something that we don't shy away from doing. It's a long-term decision. A case at the EU courts can take and if it goes to appeal, maybe 4 years. So it's quite a long time. And then once you actually win a case, that's only the beginning of the story, because then you have to make sure it's implemented. And I think it was interesting to hear from Lucas that even when you have front page news, quite often it doesn't trigger the change that you want it to, and it requires further kind of follow-up action. And that's the same for litigation. Often, you get the win and it's like you want to pop the champagne, but you realize that you've maybe got years of meeting again with the officials, bringing it to their attention. It's a long battle. I think in all in the UK and in the EU, there's usually a kind of non-litigation route that you can go down to follow up when you're refused access to information. At the European level, it's the European Ombudsman, and she has the power to really investigate transparency problems in the EU institutions, and it's free. It's very citizen friendly, so you don't have to bring all the legal arguments and all the case law, etc. You can really go and just say, you've encountered this problem, and you'll get some advice from her staff. The only issue is that her findings are not legally binding, but she's got a bit more negotiating power, which the court obviously doesn't, because it's very distant from the actual people who are making the decisions. In the UK, there's a kind of similar. The Information Commissioner as well has the competence to look at these issues as well. The good thing about that is that then you can still go to court, whereas at the European Ombudsman, it's either or. You either go to the European Ombudsman or you go to court. So you have to make that decision at that point. So I'm just going to give you, I think if I got time to give you a quick case study on something.
Not really, but maybe extremely quickly.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
Well, maybe this is just to say that things are not going so well in the transparency world. I find that we're kind of seeing a bit of a marked departure from business as usual. It was always difficult to get the information we want, but now I think we're entering quite a hostile environment, and that was marked by the European Commission. One of the first things they did, the new Commission, was amend their rules of procedure to make it really difficult, much more difficult than usual, to get your hands on information. And they've done this. I mean, at some point you can look at the slides if you're interested, but they've changed a lot of the rules, and in a really kind of illegal way, because they're just kind of overwriting the Aarhus Convention and the EU's own FOI legislation and the case law of the court. So we're taking the Commission to, well, our first step is to ask them to reassess this and to take back the rules. And if they don't agree, then the next step will be to go to court. So that'll be this summer that we'll have to do that. I won't go through all the slides. And on that slightly pessimistic tone in terms of seeing a bit of a change for the worst, I'll leave you, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks so much, Anne. And that's a really important subject that perhaps we can pick up in the discussion of either practical or legislative backsliding. I'm going to pass now to our final speaker, Joschi. Over to you.
Yes. Okay. Wait a second. So. Hopefully you now see the presentation. Okay, then let's go. Thanks also for the invitation to this talk today. I will talk a lot about of the things happening in Germany and about our new project, the Climate Helpdesk. But to start first, I want to start with this kind of architecture. That's the German Parliament, and I worked there for 1.5 years, and I was told that the architects who built this building, like on a new level, used a lot of glass because for transparency. You can see it also from the front, also a lot of glass. This is like the idea was to show, okay, we have a lot of transparency in our government. Everybody is getting to know what's happening inside there. But the reality is this one. This is an art project of Christo, more than 30 years ago. And I think this is more the reality. And what we at Frag and Staat wanted to do is like to bring light into this, buildings. What we basically do, maybe to start, like Frag and Staat, you can say, ask the government, ask the state. We're trying to bring informations from the state, from governments, from authorities at our website. You can really like go there and ask for this information, and we're trying to make it easy as possible. So our motto is like mostly we bring a light into the darkness of authorities. So also like putting this back to this picture where there's no light inside of the German Parliament. And we do this with investigation, research, campaigns, and lawsuits also. And also we want to bring more transparency into the world of politics in Germany at all. And I want to talk today mostly about a project which is quite new at Frag and Staat. We just started in December. Like before there was this kind of project, but now we're starting at a new level. And it's called the Climate Helpdesk. And it's a project between Frag and Staat and Green Legal Impact. Maybe some of you also know. I will also point the website in the chat. And what our motto is, we want to free environmental information with us together. And for this, we have a team of 3 people. 2 are lawyers, and the other one is myself. And what we do is that we offer our service to, NGOs, journalists, and for everybody at all who wants to ask stuff about environmental information. So we offer to help with the application at fragdenstaat.de. We also offer legal assistance. We trying to publish stuff. We will also have more like social media presence about this theme soon. And we also do consulting on campaigns. And what we also do is networking and workshop, what we're doing here also. Because when we look at the reality in Germany, but I think also in a lot of other countries, we have a lot of informations which are held back by authorities, and we're trying to change this. And when we look at Germany, we have the 2 main laws, the Freedom of Information Act and the Environmental Information Act. We heard about the Aarhus Convention, and also this Environmental Information Act is the stronger one because it's also part of international and European law. And when we look at the Freedom of Information Acts in Germany, it's quite varies depending on the federal states. So we have some federal states like Bavaria, where I'm sitting at the moment, who doesn't have like a Freedom of Information Act. So some federal states just don't have this kind of Freedom of Information Act. This is also making the Environmental Information Act more important because this is everywhere. And when we look at the 2 laws, first, of course, we have the EFG. I will use like more the short versions, where we have like official information, so any recording for official purposes, and we have the environmental information, which is like based on the European law also. And you have all the data on the state of environmental factors or everything else, also on health and living conditions, but I will also have some example for this. And when we look at the situation in Germany, like the political situation also in Germany, we have a new government, and we have a pressure or attack on this kind of 2 laws, because some of the people in the new government want to weaken or just get rid of these laws. The question is, of course, why? Because I think it's having a big impact on what they're doing and bringing a lot of like light into the darkness of the government. And I think that's really important that we're also trying to defend this kind of laws. So we're having this pressure at the moment in Germany. I think before also we were told in whole Europe. And that's what we are working with. And when we're looking at the environmental information, the question is, what is environmental information? I mean, it's not known for everybody. Just like a few examples, I think something which is quite known is like when you build a new power plant or gas-fired power plant. This is something also what the German new government wants to do in a great level. Then you can also get information from this by this law. Also, a very common thing in Germany is motorways. Also, this is something really, not known for like environmental informations. But also there's some other things like when you have an expert opinion on the impact of a construction project, like a coal pit, there's also something you can get to know the information because of this environmental law. We're also having some lawsuits about this at the moment, but also to bring something which is not maybe so common, like when you look at the Environmental Information Act first, it's like when you send a SMS to somebody. And there was one thing there, the finance minister or the finance minister before the new government didn't write some messages between himself and the Porsche CEO. And this is also environmental information. So this is something also we can use when we want to get information to what's happening in the state, what the state or the minister is writing to our CEO. I think that's very important to know and to get more transparency about this kind of issues. So there's a lot of things we can use in this law. And what we are doing at the Climate Helpdesk is to empower the people to use this kind of law to free these informations. But also, I was asked about the learnings of the Climate Helpdesk, and I just want to like summarize it a bit on the next pages. So yeah, as I said before, we just started with or to rebuild this project in December, so there was not so much time, but I think there are some maybe interesting things we can also discuss. So at the moment, we have, as I said before, both laws are under pressure, but it's also one more reason to use them, of course, because when they're under pressure from the right side, I think it's also showing that they worth it and that they, having a function. Of course, the Environmental Act in the European level is not so, it's like harder to put under pressure because it's not a German law. But when you look at EFG, then there is like some political parties also trying to get rid of this. And also, what is like a learning from the climate help desk is that the new German government is focusing on new fossil fuel project like gas, as I said before, and we don't really expect any real climate protection. So we will also try to have to put pressure on this kind of new gas projects. For example, that's some projects we are working on also with civil society or also with some NGOs who are working on climate issues in Germany. Another thing is that a lot of these NGOs or groups are not really aware of the possibilities offered by freedom of information, and that's something we want to change. Because we think that environmental information is like one of the bases or for a good campaign. One example was the Stop Tesla campaign. I also was part of this. Without the information of like investigative journalists or like information from Frag and Staat, there would be no good campaign on Tesla because we didn't know anything about this company in Germany. And also when we look at the climate movement in Germany or in Europe at all, we see new currents coming. At the moment, I would say we are in a state of a quite weak state of the environmental and climate movement, but there are new currents, and I think, or we think it's a good time now to bring in the knowledge about freedom of information to use it for campaigns or for other things. And also, what we do is like we want to empower these people to make a greater use of the right of information because we think that's a really important thing for the next years and for the new currents of the climate movement. And also, we think also it's a good thing to use it for research, for journalism, of course. What is Frag and Staat also doing a lot is to bring out a lot of investigation research on different themes. We also have a new journalist in our team, which is focusing on environmental and climate issues at Frag and Staat. And but also I think a learning is that we need a lot of education work and also like public relation work to communicate the right of information, because I think it's quite sometimes quite hard to really empower the people to do it, because it's about law, and law is for some people something, yeah, hard to get into it, as I myself also. And also, what is also maybe an interesting thing is that we talk about climate protection, of course, but climate adaptation will play a bigger role in the next years, also in the movements. Yeah, and also the last thing I want to say is that also when we do lawsuits at the Climate Help Desk, we this alone will attract a lot of great attention on these topics. One example is a lawsuit we're having at the moment about the topic of water, as also as part of critical infrastructure, because a company, Red Bull, I think everybody knows it, the energy drinks, bought a water source in Germany at Brandenburg, which is like near to Berlin. And yeah, there's some informations they don't want to publish, like or don't want to get on a public level, and we trying to get this information, and this alone attracted a lot of information. So I think we are on a good track. Of course, we now working for half a year, but hopefully we will do another steps in the next, yeah, months and years. And also what we're doing is a lot of workshops at the moment. And I think I did one workshop per week the last month. So that's like also what we were gonna do more to, yeah, empower the people and use it as a, yeah, that's something we can bring more to climate justice or climate protection. So I think that was my time. I have a lot of information also. Our website, we also have an English website for the Climate Help Desk. And yeah, if you have questions, just write an email or follow us on Instagram. So thanks a lot. Now I'm trying to stop it here.
Thanks, Joschi. I'm going to let Julia handle as many questions as she can in the time remaining. I see we already have some in the sidebar.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks to all of our brilliant speakers. I found that so fascinating. And yeah, it means a lot to us that you've come and talked to us today. We might not get to everybody's questions, but I will save them and then I will put them to our panelists afterwards and try to maybe send down some answers by email, especially if they're more directed to one panelist rather than the other. I guess maybe we'll start with this question from Rachel. Apart from delays, what is the biggest challenge for you in using your right to information in the context of accessing environmental information? What needs to be done to overcome these challenges? So maybe I could prompt the panelists to do a very quick one challenge and one way to overcome that challenge when you're requesting environmental information. Anyone want to start? You don't have to. Also, we can move to more questions. Lucas?
I can say something quickly. I would say public bodies have an intrinsic bias against releasing information. And one way that shows up, guaranteed every single time, really, is they won't consider the public interest in disclosure properly. And so if you price that in, if you know that that's what you're getting into, and you're willing to put a public interest argument before the information commissioner, it's really not as hard as you think, especially once you've done it 5 times. First time, it's just the curve is just plunging in terms of input to reward. You generally win. We win loads of cases at the information commissioner, and you know what? It's similar public interest. It's all the same stuff. It's environmental lobbying. It's commercial confidentiality. It's climate and environment. So we're not reinventing the wheel, frankly. But I just think being ready for that helps you succeed.
Yeah, that's a great point, making that public interest case. Joschi and then Anne.
I think like the hardest part is like to make the first step, like to do the first question to authorities. That's what we see in workshops, that when we teach about what is Frag and Staat doing or how you can use it for your work, the first step is like the hardest one. But I think when you're into it, it's getting easier. I think what is quite hard sometimes for people is the time you need to wait for an answer. I think that's something we in times when like in social media or something, we are not really willing to wait for longer questions. Of course, you need this time sometimes to have like a responsibility from the authorities you're asking for. And this is something I think for some people it's quite hard to yeah, really wait for this and have a longer view for the questions.
Yeah, that makes sense, but good things take time. Anne?
I think vacuous statements from public authorities like we need space to think, or the public won't understand that this is a draft document, things that have been torn down by the court time and time again, but they still use in every single response that I receive. Basically, I think that's what drives me completely mad. On Lucas's point on public interest, that's really interesting. The UK, the EU, the court set the bar so high that no one has ever won or received access to information by showing that there is an overriding public interest. So that's a different experience there.
Wow, really, really interesting. Okay, that might be one to like dig into more in future. Right, we don't have loads of time. I might just be a bad question host and go through a few of these. In terms of a big challenge in knowing what information to request. This was asked fairly early on in the webinar, and then I think we did have some really good examples of the types of information you can ask for. But the great thing about websites like What Do They Know that mySociety run and Frag and Staat is that it's a huge archive of hundreds and millions at this point of freedom of information requests. So you can go in and see requests that have been made, were they successful, the correspondence between the requester and the authorities. I wonder if, Anne, I could put a specific one to you here from Alexander, which is about when you make a request, authorities ignoring Aarhus and instead going with the regulation 1049. Can you kind of force the commission to deal with requests under Aarhus? And maybe the follow-up bit about more information I will ask you to send by email afterwards. But yeah, that specific thing about defaulting to the Aarhus Convention. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I think that a lot of the time the EU institutions have the opinion that it doesn't make any difference whether they deal with it under 1049 or Aarhus. And if you think that's not the case, you have to put that forward really clearly, probably at the confirmatory application stage. So once you've already received a negative reply, you have the right to go back and say, no, reconsider. And that's the point to hammer it home and say exactly why you think it needs to be dealt with under Aarhus. But at the end of the day, it's hard to. They deal with it as they find it easiest to do. It's a good one to take to the ombudsman if that happens.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. I think just to respect everyone's time and try and finish on time, I will save these questions, maybe put them to the panel by email, and we can send it out in our follow-up email. So yeah, your follow-up email will get the slides, links to the recording, and answer some of these questions, as well as links to some of the like articles that Lucas mentioned and the work of our panelists. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I think it's worth saying, I hope this has inspired you, if you haven't, to submit your first Freedom of Information request, environmental information request. And yeah, I think a message that's coming across is you only have to submit your first one, and then you get used to the patterns of these things quite quickly over time. And before you know it, you'll become an expert. Please do stay in touch with mySociety and our partners, Frag and Staat and Access to Information Europe, for more information about this sort of thing. And yeah, huge thank you for coming along. Any final words from any of our panelists? I think we'll now it's turned 1 o'clock, or maybe like a different time where you are. We'll say a huge thank you, and yeah, expect that follow-up email coming out soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks all. Really appreciate it.